Hello, welcome again. Today we'll talk about the neurovasculature of the brain. This is actually our basic circle of Willis. It's a kind of a circle. I think of it as a kind of a little guy with the two little legs out there. But anyways, there are two main blood supplies to the brain, and they all come together here at the circle of Willis. So we have here, let me label it. We have here internal carotid artery out there, and here there are two vertebral arteries which are coming from basically subclavian artery, right? And they all come together here at the circle of Willis, right? Again, I'm sorry for all these words out there. It is just to help you put this in context so that you know all the names when we'll label this diagram, and we'll also name all the parts on another diagram of the base of the brain. Okay, so we have two vertebral arteries out there. These are two vertebral arteries. Basically, two vertebral arteries, they come together and they form the basilar artery. Right, now basilar artery has multiple branches. If we talk about the branches of basilar arteries, basilar artery has the first branch, which is actually the superior cerebral artery, right here. You can actually see it here. And then it has another branch which is called as the posterior cerebral artery. This is a superior cerebral artery, and it is a posterior cerebral artery. And then here we have actually the posterior communicating artery, a posterior communicating artery that helps to make the circle and connect these vertebral arteries and basilar artery with the internal carotid artery out here, right? Now, if we talk about internal carotid artery has two major branches, two main branches. It has basically it has the main branch which is called as the middle cerebral artery. Here it has got actually middle cerebral artery out here, and here it has another branch which is called as anterior cerebral artery right here. And to complete the circle, we have anterior communicating artery, and you can clearly appreciate it out there, right? And there are also several other branches out there. For example, from basilar artery, these are pontine branches, and herein you can see these little branches which are actually feeding our hypothalamus. Basically, that's not really important to name all of these little branches. Unless you are a neurosurgeon, then you know all of these branches. Otherwise, so the bottom line is that what I want you to know is only those branches that are labeled in this diagram, right? Or let's move on. Let us look. So in this diagram, in this image, we are looking at the base of the brain. So how do you know that it's base of the brain? Basically, you can see actually our olfactory tracts are visible here. These are actually our olfactory tracts. You can clearly appreciate olfactory tracts, and that's pretty cool to appreciate them. So again, here we have internal carotid artery. You can clearly appreciate it. And this little squiggly here, this little squiggly branch out here is actually the posterior communicating artery, right? If we talk about internal carotid artery has a first branch which is actually middle cerebral artery out there. You can clearly appreciate it here. And it has another branch out here which is actually the anterior cerebral artery. You can see it here. This is the anterior cerebral artery which is coming out of this internal carotid artery, right? And then you can also appreciate very little, very small branch which is actually anterior communicating here. It's a very small out there. And then we have actually our basilar artery out there, actually formed by the union of the two vertebral arteries. These two vertebral arteries come together to form this basilar artery. Basically, these basilar arteries, these vertebral arteries also give some sort of branches. For example, before their union to form basilar artery, they actually give another branch which is called as the pica. Pica is actually the posterior inferior cerebral artery. This is the posterior inferior cerebral artery, or pica, and it often comes out from the vertebral arteries before their union to form basilar artery, right? We have another branch from the basilar artery which is actually going under the cranial nerve. This is another branch which is actually passing under the cranial nerve and coming out here. It is actually called anterior inferior cerebral artery, right? You can clearly appreciate it, here, right? Then up, if you look at here, before this posterior cerebral artery, we have another branch here which is called as actually superior cerebral artery. You can clearly appreciate this in this diagram. right? These terms are basically, this terminology is basically somehow tongue twisty, but once you get used to it, it will be very easy. So basically there are cerebrals or cerebellars out there, anteriors, inferiors, somehow posterior. So these are a bit tongue twisty, but once you practice this diagram and try to label this diagram on your notebook, it will be very easy for you. So thank you very much.